Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Carlene Maitland, the Associate Dean for Research and Graduate Affairs in the College of IST here at Penn State. And today we are very excited to have as our speakers in our research talk series, Dr. Priya Kumar and a guest, Khushi Khurana. And I'm going to introduce Priya, say a few words, and then Priya in turn will introduce Khushi. So Dr. Priya Kumar is the PNC Career Technology Professor in IST, and she's an assistant professor. She is also a non-resident fellow at the Center for Democracy and Technology in Washington, D.C., and we're very proud of that relationship. And she comes to us from the University of Maryland, where she earned her PhD in their iSchool. So she's one of our iSchool grads coming to an iSchool, a real iSchool connection. And today she's going to be talking about her exciting partnership with Khushi and her team. And I'm looking forward to hearing about it. Take it away.
Thank you, Carlene, and thanks for organizing and hosting. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I am very excited to be presenting with my research partner, Khushi Khurana, who is a sophomore at Moorestown High School in Moorestown, New Jersey. And I want to read the bio because you'll all get to appreciate what she has accomplished so far. So Khushi is passionate about technology, leadership, and community service. She designs and runs youth coding camps that use peer learning and hands-on projects to make computing more approachable for middle and high school students. Her work in these programs led to her TEDx talk on peer-led computer science education, where she was the youngest student speaker ever featured at that event. She's also a coxswain for Cooper Junior Rowing Club and actively volunteers at Hindi School, supporting younger kids as they learn the language and stay connected to their cultural roots. So a very well-rounded student already. And I also want to thank her dad, Akash Khurana, for bringing her here and supporting all of that work. Yes, they made the trek over from Jersey this morning. Thank God the weather and the traffic was smooth. So I am very excited to be sharing the work that we have been doing around this theme of partnering with youth in technology research. So I'll share a little bit about me, the work I do, and then hopefully you'll start to see some of the connections as we work through. So theory is very important to me. I do a lot of qualitative research, theory-grounded research on how digital technologies, which of course are pervasive in our everyday life, how they connect to primarily our social practices of communication and learning. And most of this work has been focused on privacy issues, and in particular children's privacy issues, although I've done work a little bit beyond that as well. But in the area of children's privacy, I've used a variety of different qualitative research methods to explore how kids are navigating privacy, how the adults in their lives are helping them, and how we can all help kids in particular learn how to navigate this increasingly digital and digitized world in a way that protects privacy and supports agency. So I've done a lot of work using interview and focus group methods, interviews and focus groups with children, teens, parents, educators, and libraries on these topics. I've also analyzed research on designing for children's privacy and security and how we as researchers and folks who design technology can support kids' privacy. And then I've also done some participatory design work. So one of the really cool things about going and doing my PhD at Maryland was that they've been active in this space for about 30 years and have an intergenerational design team where researchers, adult researchers, and kids work together to design technologies and explore tech and design issues. And so I've done some participatory design work with kids and with youth-serving librarians, again, around these issues of kids' privacy. So I've really enjoyed finding different research methodological ways to engage with kids and folks who are involved in kids' lives around some of these questions related to technology and privacy. And so I dug up what I said my future work was going to be almost 6 years ago when I interviewed for this job. And so building on a lot of this work, there were three main directions that I wanted to move in. So empirically, I wanted to analyze existing privacy-related educational materials, and I have a student who is actively working on that. From a theoretical perspective, I wanted to, again, hearkening back to my love of and appreciation of theory, use theory to explore questions around children's privacy. Have started a little bit of that work, proposed a conceptual framework called the 5Ds of privacy literacy. But then the thing that I was super excited about, that was kind of my moonshot idea, was I wanted to co-design a privacy literacy program with youth, with kids directly. Because as I did the kids' privacy work over the course of my PhD and beyond, it became clear to me that kids are already learning about privacy and how to navigate it because kids are already using technologies. So they're learning these lessons. And so how can we as adults support them without doing the I know what you should do and I'm going to instruct you what to do, because that's not always the most effective form of learning. So I wanted to do something collaborative with kids. But it was easy at Maryland because they had 30 years of experience and had a whole design team, and I knew the folks who ran it, and so I could sort of slot into some of their work. And I knew that building something like that would take a lot of time. So I put it up here, but that's one of the reasons why it was last, because I'm like, that's a big deal. So I've been, like I said, I've been chugging along on some of these, but this one, I was like, we'll see when it happens. And then in May of 2024, last year, I got an email in my inbox out of the blue from someone named Kushi expressing interest in research and mentorship. And so I read the email, and Kushi introduced herself as an 8th grader at that time who had created and run a coding camp, was planning to run it again, shared some of what she had done, and she said she had looked at my work, was really interested, and was interested in research opportunities or any kind of mentorship. And I was like, that's really cool. And so I wrote back to her and said, I would love to talk to you as long as I have your parents' consent. I will schedule a Zoom meeting. So I emailed with her mom, sent everyone the Zoom link so they had it, but then Kushi and I met, and she shared some of what she did. And I was like, wow. And I was like, how can I help? And so we sort of went back and forth a little bit, and I had been writing a paper for the SIGCSE, the Conference on Computer Science Education, that summer. And so I was already planning to submit that paper and planning to go if it got in, and it was in Pittsburgh. And so I said, well, they have a lightning talks track. And what Kushi's doing already is amazing. How can I put her in front of people to share what she's done? As we then think about how can we potentially build on that to do some of this design work. And so we worked over the summer. She drafted out versions of the talk. We submitted the abstract. It got accepted. And so earlier this year, her family trekked out to Pittsburgh. I went there also, and Kushi presented. And so this is our abstract for the talk, drawing on her experience designing these camps. And so with that, I'm actually going to now turn it over to Kushi so that she can share more of what she's done and what we've been learning through the whole process.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today, and I want to thank you all for coming out to listen to me and Dr. Kumar's work. So you already heard my bio, so you know a little bit about me, but I'm just going to start with my story and then about what I've learned from doing this research. So 2 years ago, I was just a normal 12-year-old. I was glued to a screen. I loved using technology, but I had absolutely no interest in learning about how it worked. Learning to code was not in my mind, and I had no interest in doing it at all. But today, as I stand before you, I'm 14. I've learned 8 programming languages, led 6 coding camps, and taught 150 kids how to code. So what changed? What happened in those 2 years? So everything happened really slowly. So when I set out with my first coding camp, I had no idea that I would be standing here today talking to all of you. One of those earliest pieces of my stories came in 2023, when I attended a girls-only STEM conference that completely shifted how I saw technology. I watched older girls building robots, creating apps, and talking about tech with confidence. For the first time, I thought, maybe I could do that too. Inspired, I scoured the internet looking for fun online courses to teach me basic coding. But to my surprise, I could only find adult-oriented ones. I realized that what the internet had to offer wasn't for me and it wasn't going to help me in any way. And so I decided to create my own coding camp. My first coding camp launched in July of 2023, and it ran for 8 weeks. And so when I was designing it, I really wanted to think about how could I make this interesting for kids just like me. And so that was how I began. And so even though that moment was my starting point, I later realized the larger truth that it showed me. Children encounter technology constantly, yet they rarely have a say in how adults study it, design it, or teach it. Their perspectives aren't a nice-to-have addendum. They're essential if we want technology scholarship to reflect real youth experiences. Adults design tools and studies for kids all the time, but kids rarely get asked what actually works for them. What changed for me after that STEM conference wasn't a certain curriculum or a research paper. It was connection. Watching kids my age being so immersed in technology changed what I believe I could do. Kids participate differently when the work includes them instead of overlooking them. And that idea applies whether the research is instructional, like mine, or observational, interview-based, participatory, or design-focused. No matter the method, youth participation only works when students feel seen, supported, and connected to the work. And so when I was designing the curriculum 2 years ago, I wanted to focus on things that would actually be interesting for students my age. Activities and challenges that sparked creativity, not just syntax and lecture-style learning. Not fun as an afterthought, but fun as an integral part of learning. And so across all 6 camps, the biggest lesson is this. Kids will tell you exactly what works for them, if you let them. I collect feedback forms, exit tickets, and growth assessments. Each iteration of the camp improves because kids are honest about what helps them learn and what doesn't. This adaptive, youth-driven process is exactly why youth voices need to be included in technology scholarship. If we want to understand how young people learn, think, and interact, we have to actually listen to them. So all of this led me to a bigger question. What helps kids engage in the first place? So what does fun actually mean in the context of research? In every camp, the most useful data comes from when kids are relaxed and genuinely engaged. Fun isn't fluff. It's a data-backed mechanism for engagement. When kids are enjoying themselves, they're far more willing to try unfamiliar things, give accurate feedback, and stay engaged. When the environment feels positive, kids aren't hard or scary to work with. They're genuinely fun. Kids are creative, unpredictable in the best ways, and excited to try new things. So here are a few things that have made a major difference in my camps. Games like Kahoot or Book It, movement breaks, short videos followed by open discussion, quick voting, rewards, varied activities, exit tickets, and peer support. While these strategies seem simple, they directly shape learning outcomes. The data is clear. The camps show an 80% increase in coding interest. Now, most people in this audience aren't looking to teach in coding camps, so I want to connect what I've learned to broader research with children. These principles translate across many research methods. Adaptability. Kids' attention and interest shift quickly, so flexible design studies work best when you can adjust in real time. Interactivity. Whether you're interviewing a child or running a focus group, incorporating small interactive elements keeps kids involved and willing to participate. Feedback. Just like my camps have evolved through feedback, research sessions can improve by giving simple ways to tell you what parts of the study felt uncomfortable, boring, or confusing. And finally, this one is my favorite, but candy and small rewards. It's such a basic strategy, but you can instantly see the difference in a room when you're passing out candy. It lowers anxiety, boosts morale, and makes for a great atmosphere. Now, before I share my final takeaway, I would like to thank Dr. Kumar. Having a mentor who believes in youth-led work, opens doors, and challenges me to grow has been such a blessing. The right mentor doesn't just guide you, they show you what you're capable of, and I'm so grateful to have had that support. Everything I've learned across 6 camps and hundreds of children comes back to one idea. When students feel included and taken seriously, their insights are far more powerful and honest. Whether the goal is improving instruction, understanding digital habits, or building AI literacy, their voices help researchers to see things adults simply miss. If we want research that truly represents young people's real experiences, then youth voices cannot be optional. They must be built in from the very beginning. Thank you.
So Khushi already shared with you the sort of takeaways. I will give us a little more of the research grounding in terms of what we're doing right now and what we want to be doing as we keep moving forward. So this summer, after Khushi gave her lightning talk at SIG CSE, her mom and I and Khushi, we sat down and we thought, all right, so how do we push this work forward? And came up with a plan. So Khushi and her family had already set up to run the coding camps and a new AI machine learning camp at local libraries in their community for the summer. So we worked with the IRB here at Penn State to get a research study approved and going, where we were going to collect data from this summer's camps to get a sense of empirically answering this question: how can youth-led learning help kids learn skills and foster their learning identities? You've already heard that it can, and now we're working on getting the data in place and getting the papers written up and submitted so that we can have this knowledge enter the scholarly record. And so some of the data that we're collecting is directly from elements that Khushi had already integrated into the camps. So we did a pre and post camp survey using, it was an existing scale around interest in STEM learning. I actually did forget to put up here the exit ticket data. That's a huge source of information. So at the end of every camp, when the students would give feedback on every camp session, we have that data as well. And then I went up to the camps at the end of them on the last day of the camps and ran focus groups with the students. And I can share, first of all, the candy, true, came up in all the groups. But I can also share, when I asked the students about their experience, sort of had them give me examples of what they took away, in what ways did this help them, the setup of the camp help them learn. And one of the things that several students said across all of the focus groups was, it was really inspirational to have somebody my age leading the camps, because I saw that and I'm like, oh, I can do this too. And it was a great thing to hear. And I came out and I told Khushi and her mom, like, that was something a lot of the students were saying. And so that's something that we're really excited to explore as we're going through the data. But probably my favorite component of this data collection from the summer was the last one. So the camp sessions were in the evenings. They were 7 to 8:30. So every morning the next day, we had a Zoom call scheduled, a 30-minute Zoom call in the morning, where we did a debrief, where I said, okay, Khushi, so what was the lesson plan? How did it go? Let's walk through it. And so this was in August. And of course, we're winding down the summer and I'm starting to think about the fall semester. And I was like, I'm sitting here having every day for 3 or 4 weeks. I get to have conversations with somebody all about pedagogy, all about learning, how to engage people. And I kept forgetting that I was having these conversations with a high school student, which was so incredible. And I learned a lot and grew a lot from it. And I also just want to say, part of what has been so incredible about this experience is that, Khushi designed these camps and thought through the lesson plans, the projects, the tasks, how to run the classroom. And we talked about how she incorporated all of the principles that she shared with you: adaptability, interactivity, giving out candy. And there were moments in these debriefs where I got to say, at one point I remember asking, like, I was like, Kushi, did you have look up information about instructional design or pedagogy when you were doing this? And she was like, no, I just sort of thought about what I find engaging, what are the learning experiences that I've really learned from, and I sort of used those to design these camps. And I'm like, well, you're following pedagogy best practices. Like, you're doing, backwards design. You're doing, student-centered pedagogy. Like, you're doing all these things that many of us may not know about or are still very much learning and developing. And to see her face light up and to be able to be in that moment was really incredible. So that is there's a lot of rich data in those conversations. And so we're framing this as part of a broader participatory action project where we're compiling all of this data and analyzing it to answer that question, but also really to show the value of working with youth and with kids in designing these kinds of educational experiences. And the other thing that I think is super exciting about this work, and I know can't really be replicated, but this truly is, and it truly feels like participatory action because it's coming from the community, right? I didn't find Kushi, she found me, which is amazing, and I'm really grateful for. But it's really cool because it feels like this really is research that is serving the community because the community piece already existed. So we're taking what Kushi has already been doing and thinking, what's the research perspective? How can this feed back into the research, but then also how can we show empirically that some of this stuff really works? So that's what we're doing right now. And then very briefly, we want to keep building on this. These are the ideas we have, but certainly we'd love to sort of brainstorm with you all. If you have ideas, anything you want to share, we'd love to hear it. But again, building on some of those comments from the focus groups around students, camp participants saying, like, I could see myself doing something like this, which is what we had hoped. We were really excited when we heard that. So part of what we want to do is say, okay, well, Kushi now has 150 alumni of these programs. So for folks they've already gone through it, and so if they're interested in doing something like this themselves, can we sort of create a sort of program or environment where they can build on some of the pedagogical techniques that Kushi's already been putting into practice to basically learn how to lead their own camps? And certainly they can use the same materials, or if they want to create their own camps, how can we help kids do this, basically, is a first step. And then thinking much bigger, sort of how can we scale this out or bring this to other people? Can we create a platform, whether that's some kind of online community or other type of platform, where youth who are interested in doing this, or who maybe never even thought that they could do something like this, but when they see an example are like, wait, I could do that too. How can we create a platform where youth can connect, where they can exchange resources? Certainly if they want to pick up Kushi's materials and lead their own camps, they can do that. If they want to create their own camps on other topics, how can they exchange best practices, create kind of a youth community of practice? I think that would be really cool. And so I've got a grant under review. Thank God the federal government's back in session, so maybe that review is going to continue. So I guess stay tuned and we'll find out if this work gets funded for the spring, and otherwise we'll find other opportunities. But we have a lot of ideas and we're really excited about where this could go. And so with that, I will sort of open it up to questions, discussion for both me and Kushi. So thank you for being here, and ask away.
Hi, Kushi. Nice to meet you. My name's Erica Fleming. My research is actually in peer learning in technology classrooms in higher ed. So as Dr. Kumar was talking about, we're looking at ideas for what could come in the future. I would love to talk to the two of you about what does it look like for your alumni to go to college, and how can they bring their peer learning, the things that they have learned about how peer learning impacts learning in general, with them as they go from being youth to being young adults that are going to eventually enter the workforce, and how that could have an impact on technology education at the college level as well. So I don't know that I have a question necessarily so much as I really would love to just talk to you two about that. Because literally I'm finishing my dissertation right now. So that would
Finish
be amazing.
that first, then
Yes,
we'll plan
then
this.
we'll talk about it. Hopefully a couple months. So awesome.
Do you have anything you want to share in response?
I
Here.
think none of my students are quite old enough yet to have get to college, but I think as we kind of work on one of our future steps, which is train the camp alums to lead their own camps, I think when they get to college, if that's something they're interested in still doing, it'll be really helpful for them because they've had this experience, and especially in today's world with AI changing every day, I think it'll become a really helpful tool for them to teach their peers too.
Hi, Kushi. It's great to meet you. I just have some questions a little bit more detailed about, like, can you talk a bit about, say, like day one of like your workshop? What languages do you teach in these workshops, and what is like the workshop structure around? Like, is it like a an exercise on like how to do robotics, or is it an exercise on how to do others type of, what's the coding kind of around? I'm really curious.
Okay, so I mentioned I've run 6 camps. So the very first one was one on Scratch. And so because that was also my first introduction to programming, I wanted to start with Scratch, and the kids were also around my age. So with Scratch, what I would do is I would go through, like MIT Scratch has a really like well-developed, they have lessons, they have projects. So I would go through, and before the camp started, I planned out what are the things I want to hit on. And so what I would do is I would first create the project myself and spend some time playing around with it, and then I would find that idea. And during the actual camp session, we would start with a short TED Ed video on like how satellites know your location or how your phone works. We discussed that, and then I would show them my project, and then they would have to figure out how to replicate it by themselves. And so when I moved on to my next camp, so during my camps, I don't do like one-day activities. I kind of pick one theme and focus on that throughout the 8 sessions. So the one I've done the most is my Python camp, and I chose Python because it's a really user-friendly language. There's not loads of extra syntax. And so like the first day I would do an introduction to what is Python, show a short video, why it's important, and then we would start with printing. So my favorite platform to use is Google Colab because it's very easy to use, and it being a Google product makes everything much easier. And so I would develop an activity where there would be a short like explanation, but I'd also talk about it. And then we would do a few exercises together with the class, and I'd call on the students. And then that was the practice. And then there would be an activity where they would attempt by themselves, and I would be walking around to help them.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. I'd love to talk to you after this about some ideas I had about using like wildlife GPS data and stuff. So,
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, again, I'm Carlene Maitland, Associate Dean for Research, and in that role, I get to be the wet blanket in some cases. Many of us know, and I don't know if you're aware of this, is that as adults, whenever we want to engage youth in our research practices, everybody has to go, there are so many hurdles that we have to overcome. And so I wanted to hear a little bit more, like, when you give the camps, do you need permission slips? Like, does your role as youth actually give you a free pass on some of these things? Or is it just us, right? That's one dimension, and I would like to hear from you about what you felt about those kinds of things. And I think you went and you're doing some of the camps in the library now, and if that move to the library caused some kind of bureaucracy in that regard. And then I want to give Priya the opportunity to talk about, because I mean there are people here who might be like, hey, I want to do that. Well, okay, I mean, yeah, it's work, right? Then a second part of the question, which I probably won't even be here for the answer, is we have a colleague who studies youth engagement in, I think it's Roblox, but youth as a threat vector, and that's like cybersecurity parlance for, bad behavior. And so as you look for like creating a platform where youth can gather and lead, we have this kind of perception of youth that can be a little bit rosy. And do you ever think about that? I don't know if you've had any misbehaviors in your camps, or is everybody well behaved?
That's it. For the first one, so my very first camp, the Scratch one, it started in the basement of my house, and it was all kids whose families I knew well and the kids I knew well, so there weren't any like bureaucracy issues or anything. But when I moved my camps to the library, it was a little hard because I was reaching out and I was using, like my mom was helping me because I couldn't just reach out as me and the libraries would say yes. But it was definitely difficult. So the town I live in, we actually reached out to our town library first. And we were like, we want to run these camps. We've run one before. And they actually told us no, that they didn't want us there. Wow. And so, but before that, or after that, there was a town that we lived in before, and that's right next to the one I currently live in. And so we went to them, and they were a lot more open. And after a lot of back and forth, they said, we'll give you a chance. And so that thankfully worked out. And so after that, by the time that summer ended, I was a freshman in high school. Yeah. And so how our town works is our high school is right next to our middle school. Yeah. And so I reached out to one of my old teachers and I asked him, can I run an after-school camp in your classroom? And because he knew me, he said yes. And so with the school, I also didn't have any issues because I was a former student. And then this past summer, I went back to my town library, the one that told me no. And after a lot of back and forth, a lot of calls and emails, they said yes too. And by that time, we were thinking about writing a paper and trying to get qualitative and quantitative data from the camps. And so at that point was when I was introduced to consent forms. So after working with Penn State's IRB process, which was pretty long, we developed, I think it was like 5-page long consent forms. And so on the first day of both the camps that we ran this summer, they were kind of running at the same time as each other. We took about 20 to 30 minutes to explain all of that, and then the parents had questions. So I would say that was kind of the worst part of it all. But once it was over, it was done. And then to your question about the misbehavior, speaking to the Roblox part, I probably couldn't tell you much because I'm not very active on Roblox or video games. But I do think that it's important that now, because our world is kind of entirely based out of technology, I would say that even when I see young kids who are like out at a restaurant with their parents and the only way they'll stop throwing a tantrum is if they have a giant iPad in front of them, I do think that there is a proper age that kids need to first be introduced to technology, and it's certainly not when they're 2 or 3 years old. And then even on games like Roblox, like the kids can cause a threat too, for sure, but also the adults on there can cause a threat. So it's not a good like situation for either. So I do think that there's conversations that need to be had in a certain age limit before kids get on sites like Roblox and Fortnite.
Yes, that is true. I am happy to talk just a little bit more about the IRB process because yes, it obviously is a bit of a process, but it's not as scary as some people think. And I think picking up on one of the themes that you highlighted, Kushi, which was the idea of connection, I connected directly with my assigned IRB analyst, like set up a meeting with her, said, here's what we're thinking about doing. Like I can read the materials on the website, and I have, but here's what we're thinking of doing. Like, what is the process for this? Especially because Kushi shared the curriculum and everything with me, but like I'm not designing or running these camps. And Kushi and her family handled everything with the library. And so it was a lot of like me talking to the IRB being like, here's our idea. And then she would ask me questions and it's like, okay, well, what do I need to know? And then some of it is the research design. My IRB analyst was wonderful. She was on board with the idea. She was super, anyone I tell about this project is always very impressed and is like, I want to help you get this project through. So that helps. But yeah, it was basically a lot of, so I would have a conversation with her, and then certainly we did get to the point, or we got to several points where it's like I had all these questions for her, and then she's like, you know, quite frankly, the idea was like, just write the application and then submit that, because that's the best way that she can actually review and then provide like actual responses, because otherwise the responses are still pretty general. But it absolutely was a process of, you know, certainly we scaled back some of what we wanted to do, because when I said, this is what we're thinking, she's like, well, this is all the stuff you're going to have to do, and you're going to have to talk to Penn State IT for this and get this clearance. And I was like, I don't have time to do that. So you know what? Maybe we don't need that data. And then it was like, you know, I wanted to take pictures in the camp so we'd have stuff to put on our slides. And she's like, that's a whole nother, that pushes this to the higher level. And I was like, you know, never mind. We don't need pictures. And so it is a back and forth, but I think so. Absolutely, the connection piece, the talking to people, and just saying, can we have that conversation so that I can understand what I need to do and you can understand what I'm trying to do, is sort of the most important thing. But it's not like, yes, it's long and it can be bureaucratic, but it's actually not as arduous as people think. Obviously, you know, we're not doing something, I can imagine where if you're, you know, I know we have colleagues in our college who design systems to support behavioral things or health things, and certainly that's where it'll probably definitely be a lot more complicated. But for this stuff, it actually wasn't that it wasn't that complicated. But yes, it takes a lot of back and forth.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, Kushi. Thank you for the talk. I'm one of the previous PhD students, and I had no idea she was doing this all along. No wonder she's so busy. But I think this is an amazing project as a whole, because I was reflecting on how I learned to program and working in the industry, as you know, writing code. And reflecting on the experience, I think one thing that was very salient is that when students go to college, right, they're taught, well, you're learning to program because it's going to get you a job, right? But I think what you're doing is very meaningful in the sense that you're trying to engage students in a genuine curiosity, right? Developing it as a hobby and developing their skills and creative thinking. But then you can see that there's a tension of like when they get older, like they have to think about this seriously, right? So based on your experience, like observation so far, what do you think about that kind of, you know, the societal norm, I guess?
Do you mean like the societal norm of like coding being helpful for getting jobs? Yeah.
It's a skill that's useful.
So actually, before I even attended that first STEM conference that got me hooked, my mom is actually she like majored in computer science, and she had always been telling me, I want you to code, and I tried it, and then I was like, not for me. So I think now that like the camps developed as a way for me to have fun and connect with other peers, just like you mentioned, it became sort of a hobby. And so now I know that when like my like camp alums go to college, when I go to college, coding isn't going to be seen as this like annoying task. But because it's so important nowadays, again, like in the field of like technology and how it's evolving, I think it's important that everyone knows how to code, like at least the basics. Because obviously with AI and ChatGPT now, you can get away with not knowing some of these skills. But even when I personally use it to like bounce ideas back off sometimes, I think it's really important that you understand the basics first, and then you can use ChatGPT. But if you're just using it like blindly, it's not going to be like, you're not learning anything, which is probably the most important. But I think nowadays it's really important for all students and everyone to kind of have a basic understanding of how it works.
Remarkable stuff. This is for Kushi. Different organizations have different guidance about when digital technology should be introduced to students or to young people, children. I'm curious, based on your experience with coding, but also now with AI, where do you put that? So when should AI be introduced to adolescents?
I think so. I think AI should definitely come much after they're first introduced to technology, and I think they shouldn't like be sort of dependent on it. Like how I mentioned before, like they need the iPad. Like I feel like they shouldn't be introduced too much to it until like later elementary school, like second or third grade. And so that's when I think that it's important because they're still young enough that they can easily pick it up, but they're not so young that it's they're gonna become dependent on it. And then for AI, I think it also depends on the student's maturity, but I would say later, like sixth grade or the start of middle school is when they could probably start working with it and understanding how it works. And so the camp I ran this summer, one of them was Introduction to Python, AI, and Machine Learning. And so those students were mostly of middle school age, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And so we started with the first, I think, around 3 or 4 sessions with a kind of a crash course on Python. And then we went into AI, again, because I wanted to kind of introduce the fundamentals of where AI is coming from, how it was created first, so they understand, and then go into a little more like complex about AI and machine learning.
Hello, my name is Madison Kuyanga. I'm over in the College of Education. I'm an assistant professor of learning design and technology. And so I study ethnocomputing. And so I have a question for both Kushi and Priya. So my question for you, Kushi, is what are your hopes to get out of this, like, more broadly? I know you have hopes for your students, but I see this like researcher, but also maybe computer scientist, identity is developing. What are your hopes to get out of this? And then for Priya, for your future research trajectories, your questions were around learning identities. I'm wondering about the cohort of alumni who might have learning identities, but also what about their researcher and teaching identities? Do you have thoughts about that?
So I guess I'll start. But for me, in college, I don't see myself majoring in computer science, but I do see like maybe like an interdisciplinary sort of major with technology and engineering. But the thing I love most about these camps, because even I take computer science at my high school and I get frustrated quite often too. So it's not all like flowers and roses, but for me, I really enjoy getting the opportunity to lead these camps and talking to other kids. And more so than even the coding aspect, I really enjoy just like teaching and helping the students learn something, because of course we start with the basics, but then towards the end of the camps we get into like writing programs. And so they write rock, paper, scissors bots, or like currency converters, or like tic-tac-toe. So just being able to see them like be so happy and like the joy of being able to write something on their own, I really love that part about it. But then also, like, I've seen a huge change in myself from 2 years ago when I started. Like, I learned so much leadership, how to take initiative, and like I have so much more courage now that even though other people around me aren't doing it, I can do it too. Like, it's not some impossible task. So I really just love being able to interact with kids my age and help them learn a new skill.
That makes me so excited to hear. I love your question, and thank you for being here. So I think it's funny, as we were doing this study this summer and, collecting all of the data, and then I'm thinking about how do we analyze this, and really, what are the research questions? What are the sections that we're going to be writing up in the related work? Like, what literature are we drawing on? Like, what's the academic thread here? I think it was after our first debrief session where I was like, a lot of this project, like obviously the camps are important, and the data that we're collecting from the students is both from the exit tickets, the surveys, and the focus groups is really important. But especially for this identity piece, I was like, and I haven't actually, I don't think Kushi and I have talked about this yet, but it's like, actually, Kushi, you are a big part of this research, at least the way that I'm envisioning this research paper going, because it was, in looking at the materials you created, but it was in the debrief conversations that we had where I also could see your different identities sort of coalescing and flourishing, like not just yours as coding. I mean, certainly I really love the way that the talk that you gave here, where you gave that background and very much kind of how you didn't see yourself as a coder. You weren't interested in it, and look where you are now. But even just that teaching dimension, and as somebody who, and we talked a lot about this too, where, I always knew that I wanted to go into academia, but that's because I love research and I love writing. And I was scared of teaching. I'm like, I haven't been trained to teach. I don't have the patience for it. It seems stressful, but I have to do it if I want to be a tenure track professor, so fine. And again, kudos to all of the support staff, the Learning Design Office here in IST, the Schreier Institute. I had 2 weeks I was handed, thankfully, a class that existed, and the previous faculty, Carlene had taught it and Lynette had taught it, and they gave me their material. So I had a really great starting point for my own teaching career, that and all of the folks here in IST and Schreier. And then that first week, when I was a teacher, I'm like, this is kind of fun. I actually kind of like this. And now I'm at the point where I still love the research and writing, but I love teaching, and I did not expect that at all. And then also I've become academically interested in learning. I didn't know learning science was a thing, but I was like, if I had known that before the PhD, that might have been what I would have studied. So all these things are sort of confluencing in a really interesting way. And so I think what I loved so much about our debriefs is I got to be part of and see that teacher identity, come out of these conversations, but not in a way that it was forced. It was you putting words to and conceptualizing things that you had already been doing. And that was just a really cool experience. And then I think the researcher piece of it is coming out even more now. But, Kushi, she had the transcripts of our debriefs, and so I gave her a very basic crash course intro to coding, qualitative data analysis, and, so she's been doing that piece of it. And we're gonna go through the focus group transcripts and do that. And I teach the qualitative research methods class here. So I think, for me, when I step back and think what's the most exciting or amazing part of this whole project, it is that, creating something where people are developing their own identities in, not just in the coding dimension or the technology STEM dimension, but in the teaching and research dimension is really cool. But right now we have the richest data on Kushi's experience, but I am thinking about how do we design all of this work so that we can collect data, yes, but just have more of these experiences with the alums or with other youth so that more students, more young people can have experiences like what Kushi has had. If we can do something to support that, that would be awesome. But I also know part of why this whole thing works is that it is not coming from me. It's coming from Kushi. This is initiated by her. So how do we help youth realize that they can do it too if it's not something they thought of? Because of course this kind of thing can't be imposed on somebody. And that I think is the sort of crux of it. And maybe if we create knowledge that can support that, that would be amazing.
Thanks a lot for sharing. And Priya, I have a question for you. Yeah. So when you worked with Kushi, how could you build out those youth privacy? This is one big concern, especially currently in this society, information society. Yeah. So youth, they are too young. Somehow they don't know how to share the data. It's what is safe, what is not safe. They cannot have the parents or another adult accompany with them all the time. Yeah. So when you work with those youth, collect all the data, how could you help them step by step build up those the strategy, the boundary or something? Can you tell us? That's also your part of your research, I know.
Yes, I'm actually really glad you mentioned that, because I forgot to say, so yes, obviously I mentioned at the beginning that a lot of my work has focused on privacy. And certainly the camps that Kushi has created, that was my one thought when I got your email. I was like, this is awesome. I don't really, I did some coding classes in my own education, but it's not an area that I focus in. So I was like, that's not a thing that I have really done much in, kids learning to code. But it's related to technology, and privacy can fit into all of this stuff. So certainly the privacy piece hasn't been very much a part of the work we're doing currently, but Kushi and I have talked about, and she has said she's more than happy to bring in privacy into the camps and everything. So that's certainly something we're thinking about. But I think again, what's nice about privacy is that it can be integrated into it's not like a standalone subject, really. It can be integrated, and you can talk about the privacy dimensions of almost any facet of technology. So almost anything that's related to STEM, you can build a privacy angle into it. And Christina, one of the undergrads that I'm working with, she is hard at work on item number 1 for my future agenda. So looking at educational standards across the US, computer science educational standards, to see what aspects of privacy are at least being expected, if, not directly being taught, but what are the standards. But part of when I think back to when I was giving the job talk, or when I was thinking about where do I want my research to go long term, again, privacy can be embedded into lots of different topics, but ultimately it's not really a right or wrong, yes or no kind of a topic. And my goal, at least when I think about helping young people learn how to navigate privacy, it's to help them think about what does privacy mean to you? What does it mean in these systems? And how can each of us engage with technology in a way that aligns with that kind of value system? And that kind of learning message, I think, again, it doesn't really work in standard kinds of educational environments where they're really structured with a curriculum and you have the teacher providing the knowledge to the students or things like that. And so I started coming to think that when I think of privacy education, the kind of program that I envision is best suited for informal learning environments. My thought was, because I didn't even think something like this was possible, so my thought was always like co-design, adults working with kids to design things, but it had never occurred to me that a youth could design their own thing until Cushy, showed up in my inbox. And I love that even more because, again, the messages and the ideas are gonna resonate more when they come from her than if they come from me. And I learned that when I started teaching, in college also. And so, yes, obviously, adults can bring in the experiences that they have had, but I do think it's important with privacy education to have the experience, to make sure that youth feel like, to a lot of what Cushy was saying in her portion of the talk, feel like their views and perspectives are being taken seriously. Because I think that that's really important, especially when it comes to something like privacy, which at the end of ultimately a lot of the privacy choices are about like what are your own and your community's shared values, and how can we make sure that we are living those values as we engage online.
I have a question. So Cushy, I was wondering, how did you find Dr. Kumar? So we've talked about how you just showed up miraculously in her inbox, which I think is amazing, by the way. And honestly, this is kind of a unicorn situation, right? Because you found the person who wanted to do this work already. How did you find her? Did you reach out to other faculty doing different research? How long did it take you to, I'm super curious about how all of this happened.
So I was pretty lucky, but I think I reached out to maybe 10 or 15 different professors, and that was pretty much my first time doing anything like this. And so I was kind of just looking online, as we all know, the internet's kind of a deep pit. There's so much there. There's so many different professors just in the US alone. And so I was kind of looking, but the thing that kind of struck with me the most is I found Dr. Kumar's website, and on there I was looking through it, and there was a blog section, and I noticed there was a portion about her cooking dal, which is like an Indian dish. And so I read that, and I kind of found yet another connection point, because I'm also Indian and I eat dal probably 5 or 6 times a week. And so just reading her story kind of made me laugh a little bit. And so that was kind of that was the final thing. I was already planning to reach out anyway. And then I was like, oh, this is so cool. So I decided to reach out, and out of maybe the 15 professors I emailed, I got a response back from 2 or 3, but Dr. Kumar was the only one who seemed like she was genuinely interested and not just replying out of having to. I had not heard that story, so I appreciate
Also, that's amazing. That brings me so much joy. So I also just want to say you talked during your talk about how going through this process of creating these coding camps and running them and everything build up your confidence and your leadership abilities. But I just want to say the amount of confidence it takes to cold email a faculty member, like a tenure-line faculty member, just be like, hey, I'm doing this thing. Do you want to help? Like, that's amazing. I just wanted to say that. Sorry.
Thank you. I figured there was no harm, and if she didn't respond or she didn't want to, it's not like I would ever see her. So.
Any other questions?
Hi, Kushi. I'm Zena. Nice to meet you. So I just have a question about the details of the recruitment process. I wonder, I know you reach out to different libraries or schools, and how do you, for example, attract those youths to your camp? Do you have a advertisement, or is it just youth so curious about coding so they saw the thing and they just want to jump in? So what's the recruitment process for that? And also what's the motivation for youth to join? And after they took the workshop, for example, do they feel like they get a lot of get what they expected from the workshop?
So about the recruitment, I don't know if my response is going to be too helpful for you, but my first camp at home, it was just reaching out to kids my age that I knew. And so, but my camps in the library, I actually didn't have much to do at all with the recruitment process, because those libraries have summer catalog events. And so I just put a description, a short paragraph about what I would be teaching. And parents like to look at it and sign their kids up for stuff. And so that was how the recruitment worked for that. And then in the schools, I would just put up flyers and on the daily announcements. So that was how my recruitment process works. And then I would say for the kids who come in after they've completed the camps, a lot of them are I didn't expect to enjoy this at all because my parents like to make me do things, and they were pleasantly surprised that they had fun. But I've had a decent amount of students who, even after the camps ended, they've stayed in touch with me and asked, where can I learn more? And they'll send me the projects they're doing, or if they need help debugging something, they'll reach out to me. So I think I'm really fortunate to have former students who still feel so connected to the coding that I taught them and still want to keep going.
This reminds me, I'm pretty sure when we were at the end of one of the camps, didn't one of the students ask you for a recommendation letter for something? Right.
Yeah, so one of the students reached out for a recommendation letter for National Junior Honor Society, which I thought was really sweet. And then 2 weeks later, I had 2 other students from the same camp also reach out for recommendation letters.
What's the age range of, did you have a stated age range, or did you just accept any kids who were interested?
So I think on the website it was 10 to 18, but I did have kids who were 8 and they said, oh, can I join? And I said, sure, why not?
That was also one of the things with IRB. It was do we want to create an age cutoff? So there was a little, and then we were just you know what, it's just easier if we don't, and then we just sort of take whoever comes. So.
Hi, Kushi. Nice to meet you, and so empowering hearing your story. I'm Fatima, one of the PhD students with Dr. Kumar. I'm curious to know how you prepare yourself with the knowledge that you want to introduce for your camp students, or maybe how do you judge yourself? Am I knowing enough to introduce that course or not?
So with the second part of your question that said, how do I know if I know enough? A lot of times I don't. So I'm being completely honest. So I remember my Python camp, so I would learn the material the day before or 2 days before I would go and teach it. So it was a very much sort of I'm learning at the same time as my students. And so I kind of just have that if I don't know something, I'll figure it out. I'm not too scared of that. And I remember during one of the camps, one of the students was working on her projects and she asked me how to do something. And I told her I didn't know, but I would get back to her. And so I asked a few people who I know had more experience in coding. And then 20 minutes later, I told her, oh, this is how you can do something. So I think to be a teacher, like I know I mentioned like adaptability. You kind of just need to be okay with you're not going to know everything, and it's okay. Not everyone can know everything, and just having that flexibility to kind of admit, because you don't want to like pretend you know it either, because that's also not very helpful for them. And then as to finding materials, I mentioned my mom is like computer science, and my brother's also very into coding. So I'm really fortunate to have like such a great team around me to help me out. But other than that, like I remember for the Python camp and the Scratch camp, I had a much easier time with this because coding kind of has a process, and there's a lot of different places you can go to find an established order of what to teach and in what order. And I remember for the AI and machine learning camp that I taught this past summer, that was definitely much more of a struggle because as AI is changing every day, where do you even start to teach younger kids about it who might not fully understand it? And so I looked around for a long time, and finally I found this website that was teaching AI for high school students. And so that was kind of my like starting point where I found a few ideas. And then after that, like I based some of my material for the first 2 AI sessions based off of that. But afterwards, I would kind of just look around, and then when I was teaching machine learning, I was just kind of looking for resources, and I found like Google Teachable Machine, where students can take pictures or upload sounds, and then Google will train a machine. So it was kind of just like, there wasn't anywhere set where I found my material from. It was kind of just looking around and seeing what I could find.
Hi, Kushi. My name is Sawyer. I'm an undergrad at the College of IST here. And you mentioned like finding materials from different places and adding your own things to it, which I think is really cool. I was just curious, like when you find some of your base materials online, like what makes you gravitate towards something that you're like, oh, this looks like something I could use? And what are some signs that are like, okay, this is mostly good, but I don't like this part for kids specifically, so I'm gonna take that out. Like, what are some flags that you see or things you like to add in?
So I think this will probably be easier for me than it is for you, but I kind of just like to play around with stuff. Like I'll spend like 30 minutes or an hour, and if I find it's something that's not like very long, like there's not a lot of text, or it's more videos or like actual hands-on activities, because another challenge of the AI camps was with Python and coding, it's very hands-on. Like I can't give students like text and they read it and then they code. I tell them what to do and then they're all doing it by themselves, which is also very helpful to keep them engaged because they're the ones doing everything. And so I'm kind of just looking for activities that the students are the ones driving everything. And then for the AI camps, I would look for activities where I could quickly explain it to them. And then like with Google Teachable Machine, they work on it on their own. They're finding photos from the internet, uploading them, or like there was this, I also added some games. So there was this game I found online. It was called Akinator, and they would think of some character in their head, and then the computer would ask them questions about it, and then based on their responses, it would go and it would guess what character they were thinking of. And when I first stumbled across it, I had very low expectations, because how could the computer know some random character out of the millions across that I'm thinking of? And I found that it was really accurate. So like when my students played it, they were like, how did it know? So it's kind of just things that I feel like even adults, you can play with stuff, and if it's something that you find interesting or fun, it's just that. So go, like, I think just based off your gut, and if it's something you would enjoy, there's a good chance the kids are going to enjoy it as well.
Hi, Kushi. I'm Christina. I'm another undergraduate student here within the college. I work with Dr. Kumar. I just want to commend you for what you've done, because you've been extremely creative and diligent in both developing the camps and in reaching out to Dr. Kumar. As someone who has cold emailed before, it takes a lot of courage. My question has to do with the goal of like training the camp alums to go on and create their own camps. Is there a formal way that you stay connected to all of them?
Thank you for your kind words. For the camp alums, it's not something we've explored too deeply yet, But a lot of times, a way I can stay connected to them is I have all their emails and they have mine, is because I create a Google Classroom and I post like the activities and the resources on there. And so a lot of times they'll stay in touch, or if I email them, I kind of know they'll respond because they're very active. So.
Okay.
We have about 3 minutes left, I think. Does anyone have any last questions?
When do you start your PhD program?
Don't know yet. I'll get back to you on that one.
Maybe graduate high school first. Like, that's cool. Thanks for being here. And thank you so much to Kushi and Dr. Kumar. Amazing, amazing, incredible work. And thank you for sharing with us. And thank you for the drive. Oh my gosh. And thank you to your dad for bringing you. I'm sure there are people who are going to want to come up and talk to you afterwards. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you.